how Apple became a $3 trillion company. As its sales continued to grow and it spent hundreds of billions of dollars on its own shares, the value of the iPhone manufacturer tripled since 2018. Combine Amazon, Comcast, Morgan Stanley, McDonald's, Disney, Netflix, Nike, ExxonMobil, Coca-Cola, AT&T, Goldman Sachs, Boeing, IBM, and Ford. Still, Apple is more valuable. The value of Apple, a computer business that was founded in a garage in California in 1976, has grown to $3 trillion. When its shares temporarily exceeded $182.86 per share before closing at $182.01 on Monday, it became the first publicly traded corporation to ever reach that amount. The worth of Apple is even more astounding when you consider how quickly its value has increased recently. After 42 years, Apple finally reached its goal, having a $1 trillion market value in August 2018. Within 2 years, it had risen beyond $2 trillion. It only took 16 months and 15 days to reach the next trillion. A few years ago, such a valuation would have been inconceivable. Now, it appears to be another milestone for a business giant that is continually expanding and seems to face few significant obstacles. Microsoft, another tech behemoth, may join Apple in the $3 trillion club in the early part of this year. When we first started, we believed the business would be prosperous and last forever. The engineer Steve Wozniak, who co-founded Apple with Steve Jobs in 1976, stated, "But you don't truly envision this. The cost of the memory needed to store one song was $1 million at the time." An estimated value of $3 trillion is impressive by almost any standard. It is worth more than the combined value of all cryptocurrencies in existence. It is comparable to either Britain's or India's gross domestic GDP, and it is almost equal to 6 of the largest American banks, Morgan Chase or 30 General Electrics. According to Howard Silverblatt, an analyst who studies valuations at S&P Dow Jones indices, Apple now makes up over 7% of the total value of the S&P 500, breaking IBM's previous high of 6.4% in 1984. According to him, Apple makes up around 3.3% of the value of all worldwide stock markets. Apple's growth is the result of a tight hold it has on consumers, a favorable economy for its business and stock, and savvy management of a sizable cash reserve. In January 2007, Apple announced the iPhone and had a market capitalization of $73.4 billion. The iPhone has already become one of history's best-selling items, and 15 years later is still registering tremendous growth. Sales of iPhones totaled $192 billion in the fiscal year that ended in September, an increase of over 40% from the year before. As consumers use their devices more for work, school, and socializing, the pandemic also caused sales of other Apple products to skyrocket. Investors also flocked to the safety of Apple's stock amid the rising economic uncertainty throughout the world. Apple now has a cash reserve large enough to acquire a company like UPS, Starbucks, or Morgan Stanley entirely because to its massive revenues and high profit margins. Apple reported having $190 billion in cash and investments at the end of September. According to Aswath Damodaran, a finance professor at New York University who has researched Apple, they've created the greatest cash machine in history. But rather than making a significant acquisition or even doing something expensive and ambitious like constructing numerous plants in the United States, Apple has chosen to buy its own stock in order to mostly return capital to investors. According to Mr. Silverblatt's estimate, Apple has invested $488 billion in its own stock over the previous 10 years, significantly more than any other firm. Much of that spending happened after Apple exploited a 2017 tax legislation to bring back to the United States the majority of the $252 billion it had been holding abroad. According to Mr. Silverblatt, Apple is currently behind 14 of the 15 biggest stock buybacks in a single financial quarter. They serve as the model, he declared. According to an Apple representative, the business has invested more than $82 billion in R&D over the previous 5 years, consistently increasing its expenditure each year. Apple also claims to employ roughly 154,000 people, which is 38,000 more than it did 5 years ago. The biggest taxpayer in the US is also Apple. The business reported paying $45 billion in taxes over the previous 5 years in April. Regarding buybacks, economists are divided. According to some economists, businesses with surplus cash should provide the money to their shareholders. They assert that doing so is far better for the economy than hoarding enormous sums of money. The idea that buybacks are somehow falling into a black hole is mysterious, according to Mr. Damodaran. That money is being paid to investors. Other economists contend that buybacks are primarily intended to boost a company's market value and that the funds would be better allocated to internal business investments, pay increases, or even price reductions. For instance, Apple has invested enormous sums of money in the purchase of its own shares while also employing low-wage labor to construct its products, making great efforts to evade taxes and customs and consistently boosting the cost of its devices. Apple might have utilized that money for a variety of purposes. Instead, they're using it to increase their stock price, according to William Lazonik, a prominent opponent of buybacks since the 1980s and professor emeritus of economics at the University of Massachusetts. According to Mr. Lazonik, stock buybacks drive up stock prices by inciting investors to purchase, which then fuels market momentum as other investors try to profit from the increase. Stock repurchases lower the total number of shares that are available for purchase. This increases the value of each remaining share and strengthens the company's fundamentals, which are factors that big investors and automated trading algorithms use to select stocks. The stock price therefore increases. According to Mr. Lazonik, a number of factors combine to produce a $3 trillion valuation. It's impossible to know how much of that is speculation, how much is manipulation, and how much is innovation, he said. During Monday's intraday trade, Apple temporarily exceeded the $3 trillion market cap before falling back below it. When Apple's stock price reached $182.86, it overcame the barrier. Apple increased 2.5% on Monday to settle at $182.01, narrowly missing the $3 trillion threshold. The achievement is largely symbolic, but it demonstrates that investors still have faith in Apple stock's potential for expansion. Apple's market worth tripled in less than 4 years to reach $3 trillion. Analysts also see a lot of possibility for growth. In its fourth-quarter earnings, Apple exhibited annual increase across all of its product categories, with revenue climbing 29% year-over-year. Apple's services division expanded 25.6% year-over-year and generated more than $18 billion in revenue during the quarter, even though the iPhone is still the company's main source of revenues. For instance, Katie Huberty of Morgan Stanley increased the company's price estimate for Apple from $164 to $200 in December, while maintaining the equivalent of a buy rating, claiming that the share price hasn't yet factored in the impact of future goods like virtual reality and augmented reality headsets. Huberty said that she anticipates Apple will ship 83 million handsets during the December quarter, 3 million more than projected, and that App Store revenue will surpass Morgan Stanley's projections for the quarter. According to analyst Ming-Chi Kuo of TFI Asset Management Limited, Apple sold 27 million pairs of its most recent AirPods model over the holiday season, propelling a 20% year-over-year gain for the company's wearables division during the quarter. The mark is a watershed moment, according to Wedbush analyst Daniel Ives, but there is still room for growth, particularly given that Ives places a $1.5 trillion value on Apple's services sector. Thanks to its robust balance sheet and enormous cash flow, which it uses to invest in new products, stock buybacks, and to return capital to shareholders through dividends, Apple served as a shelter for investors amid the recent market turbulence. On August 2, 2018, during intraday trading, Apple became the first publicly traded U.S. business to reach a $1 trillion market cap. On August 19, 2020, just over 2 years later, it reached a $2 trillion valuation. That's it for today's video. Please like the video and subscribe the channel for future